I'm trying to be short. This presentation is about the dilemmas of young ICT engineers, and this is a piece of our big research project that we told before about with Oscar. In this project, we wanted to know the experiences of young women qualified, very qualified, like computer and telecommunication engineers working in very traditionally male-dominated sectors. And we did so just because we found 10 young engineers that wanted to cooperate with us. So they were telecommunication and computer engineers working at private companies or at the university with no less than 5 years of professional experience. And for us, the age was the key variable. We selected the period between 25 to 35, but in fact, the 10 women were between 28 and 33. And this was interesting because this is the period of the transition from the education to the labor market. And in this case, those women, they all belong to what we can call the equality generation in Spain, because they were born when Spain was a democracy and when there was more legislation about equal rights for women and men. And then they were confronted to their own strategies for reconciling and for maternity. So they are a very good example of the transition point in the life cycle. Because young engineers face dilemmas that are a situation in which they are required to make a choice between options that are or seem equally unfavorable or mutually exclusive. So there are several dilemmas. I'm going to try to tell you the 8 of them in a short way. So let's go with the first one. In our interviews with them, the main problem, the first problem that showed up was the choice of studies that we have talked about this morning. And then I must say that they all were very good students with a strong motivation for engineering and really passionate for science. So the dilemma was about selecting a breaking choice and not following the stereotypes and gender roles, or following the expected choice. Obviously, those women selected the breaking choice and followed their passion for engineering and so on. The second dilemma was about the professional trajectories. And this is interesting because it has to do with some other things that Lisa said, and also from what we told this morning about. They were all telecommunication and computer engineers. At first, most of them went to the private companies, some of them to the university, but because of not being satisfied with their jobs and not seeing clearly that they could be promoted, many of them went to the public sector, first to public companies, some of them to the university, but many of them had ended or were thinking about ending as civil servants, forgetting everything about engineering, like studying law and taxes or whatever, but just in order to forget about engineering. And that is interesting, because we found it's more and more important, that type of behavior. Then the third dilemma was about the meritocratic model. It was very interesting that those women needed to believe that the processes of selection and promotion are objective and fair. And although their testimonies suggest that selection and promotion processes are very marked by sexism and favoritism, for them, recognizing arbitrarity and bias make them feel very uncomfortable. So it was very difficult to make them recognize their situation. Okay? Then the fourth dilemma was about maternity. That is a key time period in the life of women. Like, you have to build your curriculum. This is the moment also of your personal development, and this is the moment also where you increase your personal responsibilities. And then we found two different attitudes about that. On the one hand, women that thought that motherhood was the greatest barrier, so they decided to postpone motherhood in order to have some stability and a better status on the company. Of course, with fears and insecurities, because they were sure that they were making a sacrifice, a very, very big sacrifice. And then there were others that decided that motherhood was something impossible to renounce, that they wanted to be mother. So they decided, even if it was not very easy, that professional and personal sphere could be perfectly compatible with a lot of problems, but that was a very interesting dilemma. Then, as the traditional division of labor persists, there was the dilemma of reconciliation. And then we found two different attitudes. On the one hand, the attitude of being a superwoman, like the perfect mother and the perfect worker. And those women were very clear that the family is a driver, not a barrier. But the problem was the attitude of the partner, because many of them have supportive partners, but some of them showed the problem that partners that male are also prisoners of an environment that don't expect them to be supportive with their wives. So this is the type of superwoman, and then there was the other part of the dilemma, the ones that recognize the need to make sacrifices, at least temporarily, and they focus on their personal development. Finally not. There was a sixth dilemma about the deficit is where women continue to be a minority in the ICT sector, so it is a deficit on the part of women, or it is a deficit on the part of organization. So in this case, it was quite clear that even if they recognize that women face structural and cultural barriers, most of them try to escape from the reality and ignore the reality of inequality. So, and I remember, and maybe Oscar also remembers, and some other people from my research team, that when Susana was giving this presentation the first time, there were several young engineers on the hall, and they were like feeling very bad, because their behavior reflected in our presentation. Then the seventh dilemma is about the positive discrimination. We have found among those young engineers a very poor knowledge of the Gender Equality Act that was approved in Spain in 2007. So they identify the law with quotas, and I must say that in the Spanish law we don't have quotas, and they reject positive discrimination. And that was related to two different attitudes. Some of them think that gender discrimination is part of the past, so they ignore the problem, minimize the problem, and some of them acknowledge that gender discrimination is part of their reality. So they are more in favor of some type of quotas, and they are also very aware of the fact that women's presence in position of responsibility could have positive effect. And then I go to the final dilemma about about equality. Those women are very sure that they are the equality generation, so they tend to minimize the importance of a sexist attitude. So on the one hand, they have a very strong desire for equality, and they think that equality is already achieved, but on the other hand, they are aware of the fact that inequality is not, that the reality is unequal, so there is still a long way to go. Looking at the future, their perception was that there was a need to increase women representation and status in the ICT sector, and women should make the effort, and this is interesting, to integrate in networks of support, but male networks, in order to become, as you said before, part as a boy. And so, well, they were not, I must say that in the end, after these 8 dilemmas, they were not very clear about their futures. So this even is just the testimony of 10 young engineers, I think is very valuable because it can show us from a very direct perspective, how do women feel in these transition points in their life that we are talking about, and very often we forget how hard it can be, and how often you don't want to see the reality in front of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.